Okay. So in yesterday's discussion, we distinguished between the growth and development, and we tried to understand the concept of the growth in an easy and simple manner. And then, along with that, we discussed a very important concept of economy, that is the taper tantrum concept. I hope that is also clear to you. So, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss that this inclusive development, which is called the inclusive growth as well. So, what is its status in India as of now? What are the various challenges in India? Right? Why in India the very high rate of growth, approximately equal to 9% of GDP growth, could not turn into the development, could not contribute positive into the lives of those people who are living in the rural areas, who are living below poverty line, who are living below slums in the urban uh, centers. So these are the big questions. Basically, this is a question related with the socio-economic aspect of life. Right? So that is why, as far as the topic we are going to discuss today, this topic is important for your essay paper, and this topic is important for paper 1 of the general studies in the UPSC mains examination, and paper 3 of the general studies, paper 3 of general studies in the UPSC mains examination, right? So let me start the discussion of today, right? So yesterday, what we discussed the two important things. One is the growth, and second is the development. We discussed the two important things in yesterday's lecture. Okay? And in that lecture, we discussed that growth and development are two separate concepts. Growth and development are two different concepts, right? So, and in that lecture, I told you that as far as the growth is concerned, growth is something related with the output, right? So, increase or in the output, right, in an economy is termed as positive economic growth. Is termed as positive economic growth. Okay, and fall in output or decrease in output in an economy is negative termed as negative economic growth, right? Termed as negative economic growth. So one thing which I would like to tell you here, that from this simple discussion, we can conclude that two important points we can conclude. Number one, that growth is a dynamic concept. Growth is a dynamic phenomenon, right? So it is associated with change. It is associated with change in the level of output of goods and services in an economy. Level of output of goods and services in an economy. Okay, so this is the important point here, right? And as far as the change is concerned, so that change can be either negative or that change can be positive as well, right? So let me take it here like this, right? So this is the 0 point on the x-axis, right? 0, right? And towards this end, let us say it is the positive aspect, and towards this end, this is the negative scale, right? So let us take it like this, okay? So it is negative. This is positive, and this side it is negative, okay? So one thing is that this is negative, right? So one thing is that, so it means anything, whether it is positive or it is negative, right? So it is termed as growth. Growth can be positive, growth can be negative. So growth is a two-dimensional phenomena. It can be positive, it can be negative as well, right? Growth means change. Okay? So this is the one point, right? And the second thing is, which is obviously clear from this thing only, that economic growth is a quantitative phenomenon, is a quantitative phenomenon. So that is the next important point, that economic growth is a quantitative phenomenon. So whatever the quantitative phenomena exists in this world, so that quantitative phenomena remains measurable, right? So that quantitative phenomena remains measurable, right? So that means growth is a, right? Growth can be measured, right? So it is a measurable phenomena, we can say, right? Phenomenon, it's a measurable phenomenon, which is growth, right? And yesterday we discussed that next to growth, because there are two important aspects in an economy, right? So one important aspect is the output, which is the one thing, right? Output, which is the one thing. And the second important aspect is the distribution of the output, distribution of the output, right? So this distribution of the output can be, right? This distribution of the output can be lopsided, and this distribution of the output can be balanced, right? So these are two things here, okay? So whatever the development is concerned, as far as the development is concerned, by development we mean the quality of the distribution or nature of the distribution of the output in an economy that determines the economic development in an economy, right? So one thing is that for the economic development, there is one thing which is required, which must be sure. What is that? That is the positive growth should be there, right? Positive growth should be there. And the second important thing which is required, that is the second important thing which is required, that is, we can say, the balanced distribution, balanced distribution of that distribution of the fruits of positive growth. Okay, so balanced distribution of the fruits of positive growth, positive economic growth. So that is what leads to the development in an economy, right? So it means every growth does not guarantee the development, but yes, development cannot be imagined without the growth, without the positive growth. So this is an important thing, right, which we should bear in mind. Okay, so these are the two important things here. right? And yesterday we also discussed that as far as the development is concerned, right? As far as the development is concerned, so there are two approaches of economic development which we discussed yesterday, right? So one thing is that it is very clear that development occurs when the, which I have this told you in the previous slide, that development occurs when the benefits of economic growth are distributed, when the benefits of economic growth are distributed uh, in a balanced way, distributed in a balanced way. So that is one thing. So now the next question arises that what about the, or how can we, you can say, make the distribution happen in a balanced way? This is the second point which is there. So for the distribution to happen in a balanced way, there are two theories, two approaches we can say. One approach is known as the trickle-down approach. One approach is known as the trickle-down approach, which is there, right? And the second approach, which is important, that is the inclusive development, which is the inclusive development, or we can say inclusive growth. So these are the two important approaches. These are the two important theories, right? As far as the economic development is concerned. So as far as this trickle down approach is concerned, according to the trickle down approach, so you can say once the rate of economic growth, right? Once the rate of economic growth reaches a sufficient height, then the benefits of growth start percolating downwards, right? Start percolating downwards. So this is a start percolating downwards, and it leads to, right, percolating downwards, and this leads to the sharing of benefits of growth by all, right? And this leads to the sharing of benefits of growth by for all. Okay, how that when this happens, then the growth becomes, okay, because the after vertical growth, right? After vertical growth means the growth in terms of reasonably high rate of economic growth. Reasonably high rate of economic growth means output, right? Economic growth. So this is there after vertical growth, right? In terms of reasonably high rate of growth, right? Achieves its height, then it start it starts becoming broad-based horizontally. Then it starts becoming broad-based horizontally. horizontally. Okay, and when it becomes broad-based horizontally, then it covers. Once it starts becoming broad-based horizontally, then it starts covering the, then it takes into its fold, then it takes into its fold the section of society, the section of society which is poor and which remained excluded so far, right? So this is the main theory of what the trickle down theory says. This is that, right? So it means that first of all, the growth will reach a height, right? And after reaching a height, then the growth will start becoming broad based in this term, right? So when it will become broad based, right? So then it will start covering the other sections of the population as well, and the benefits of the growth will be automatically distributed among the among those sections of the society which were excluded previously, right? So this is basically the trickle down theory approach. Okay, so this is one approach, but as far as India's case is concerned, right, in the decades of 1970s, 1980s, in the decades of 1970s, India experienced Hindu rate of growth, as we discussed yesterday, right? So Indian economy experienced Hindu rate of growth, Hindu rate of growth, as we discussed yesterday, right? It means the economic growth rate remained around, economic growth rate remained around, 1 second, just 1 second. Let me take the call, okay? So we were discussing here that Indian economy experienced Hindu rate of growth during that time, right? And economic growth rate was around 3.5% only. Economic growth rate remained around 3.5% only. 3.5% only. So that was the basic thing, right? So at that time, our policymakers and our economists, analysts were of the view that, right? So the experts the experts were of the view that you can say growth rate in India requires to be pushed up. that growth rate of India requires to be pushed up for its benefits to be shared by many. For its benefits to be shared by many. Okay, so one point is that benefits to be shared by many. Okay, so one point was that because the rate of economic growth was poor in our country, due to the poor rate of economic growth in our country, right, the policymakers and the experts were of the view that till the economic growth in India is not pushed up, till then we cannot shift the Indian economy into a better position. We cannot ensure better living. We cannot ensure poverty reduction. We cannot ensure the high rate of employment in India because the problem is that our economic growth rate is very poor, right? So that was the main point, right? And one thing is that, right, after vertical growth, this is there. Okay, so trickle down theory, why failed? This leads to the sharing of benefit of growth for all, right? So now the point we are going to discuss that the trickle down theory, because everywhere in the rest of the world, the trickle down theory hold good, right? Everywhere in the rest of the world, the trickle down theory right, proved right right, because after they achieve the sufficiently higher economic growth, then their growth becomes broad based, and they start providing the benefit to the various sections of the society, right, in terms of the social security, in terms of employment, in terms of poverty reduction, in terms of health, education, etc., etc. But we were quite sure about this, that once our growth rate will achieve the height, then at that point, at that level or beyond that, uh, the excluded people in the Indian society will automatically be, right, you can say, uh, will automatically be included in the fold of the economic growth, right? So that was or the benefits of the economic growth would start percolating downwards, right, to cover those strata of the population which remained, you can say, which remained excluded so far. So that was the point, right? But this trickle down theory could not, right, hold true as far as the India's case was concerned, right? But this trickle down theory could not hold true as far as the case of India's is concerned. In India's case, right? So how can we say that it was not proved, right, true in India's case? One thing is that in the first decade of 21st century, India's economic growth touched the figure of 9%, which is quite higher, right? Which is quite higher. And even after that, we could not tackle the problems of poverty. Even after that, we could not tackle the problem of, we could not address the problems of rural development, okay, unemployment, the problems of rural underdevelopment, unemployment, we can see. Unemployment, poverty, caste discrimination, right? Then you can say other problems are there, right? Like women participation, child labor, etc. Right? So we could not address these problems even after reaching such a high rate of growth, right? One evidence is this. And the second evidence was that according to a survey conducted by some, you can say, international agency, what that survey says that, right, out of the total population of India, right, about 10% of population, right, 10% of population holds, 10% of population holds, you can say, 52.7% share of India's GDP, right, holds 2.5% share of India's GDP. And the second thing was that, and the rest of the 90% of population, right, that holds only and only, you can say, 47.3% share of India's GDP, right? So, such is the height of, you can say, inequality in our society, right? So, the second thing is, right, what witnesses that India's economic growth could not achieve the results in terms of the development, right? So, what is that? There is the height of inequality, right? Height of inequality in our society, right? Height of inequality. So, the next thing is that we can say there is the regional imbalance. Regional imbalance is there, right? There is the problem of regional imbalance, both interregional as well as intra-regional imbalance is there, right? And the next thing is there is the sectoral imbalance in the Indian economy. Sectoral imbalance, right? If we talk about the sectoral imbalance in Indian economy, right? So then we can say here that, let's suppose this is the entire, these are the three sectors of Indian economy, right? One is, we can say, the agriculture sector of Indian economy. Second is, we can say, the industrial manufacturing sector of Indian economy. And third is the service sector of Indian economy, right? So let me write here 1, 2, and 3, right? 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So one is, we can say, the agriculture sector of Indian economy, right? Number one is the agri sector. So agriculture sector contributes around 16% into the, you can say, total GDP of the country, right? And the second thing is that industry sector, right, is, or manufacturing sector is contributing approximately 31% into the GDP of the country. These are the figures of the 2020, right? In 2020, agriculture sector contributed about 16%, industry or manufacturing contributed about 31%, and the service sector in our economy, that contributed about 53.66%, right? We can say that was the contribution of this sector, around 53.66%. So it means there is sectoral imbalance in Indian economy as well, right? And sectoral imbalance, what is the effect of the sectoral imbalance? We know that 65% population of India is living in the rural areas, and that 65% of population is depending on the agriculture, you can say. And if that a right bigger share of the population is depending on agriculture in our country, then obviously their 16% contribution into the GDP of the country, that is quite unjustified, right? So it in itself proves that there is the exclusion of the rural sector from the India's growth, right? It means the benefits of the growth, economic growth of India are not percolating into the rural society, right? So it means India's growth is more urban oriented growth, we can say, right? So that is one important aspect which is there, right? So from these things, it becomes visible that we can say, right, there is very widespread poverty in our country, right? There is sectoral imbalance in our country. There is regional imbalance in our country, regional imbalance, both inter and intra-regional imbalance. There is a height of the inequality, right, among the rich and poor also, right? And there is a underdeveloped rural underdevelopment. There is a unemployment. There is poverty. There is the caste discrimination. There is lack of women participation. There is lack of the there is the problem of the child labor also, right? And a significant percentage of population of our country, right, don't have a roof on their heads, right? So they don't have shelter, right? They don't have houses. They are living on the roadsides, under the bridges, footpaths, etc., etc. So that is there, right? And there is problem of the rural connectivity. Rural connectivity means the physical connectivity as well as the knowledge connectivity, right? As far as the physical connectivity is concerned, there is lack of the roads, right? There is lack of the you can say that internet connectivity, communication, that is there, right? And then uh, as far as the knowledge connectivity is there, right? So we can say uh, in the rural India, right? So there are you can say less resources available for the rural population, right, to gain the knowledge, to gain the education, etc., etc., right? Like we can say reach of newspapers is very poor, right? Internet connectivity is very poor in the rural areas, right? All these things are, you can say, can be taken as part of the knowledge connectivity, right? So many of the villages of India, right, are still, you can say, uh, awaiting for the electrification, right? So that goes in the physical connectivity aspect, right? So that these are the problems, and then we can say, apart from that, there can be the another aspect. So many of the households in the rural, they still don't have the safe drinking water connection, right? So that is also one problem, right? So many of the you can say people living in the rural areas, right, they don't have access to the financial services. Financial exclusion is one issue, though PM Jan Dhan Yojana was an effective step in that direction, but I think still there are individuals or the households who are not enjoying the services. So that is another problem, right? So it means there are a lot of problems there, right? And still, due to the orthodox social mindset, you can say, still the girls are not sent to the schools, colleges, or universities, right, for taking the higher studies. Still, they are not allowed to go out for work, right? So these are the problems, right? Problem of child labor, right? Particularly in that brick kiln sector, that is very much, you can say, high intensity of that problem which is existing there. So all these things prove that the high economic growth in the country could not deliver in terms of the development, in terms of the inclusion, we can say, right? In terms of the inclusion. So that is the thing, right? So now the next question arises that why trickle down theory, why trickle down theory, right, failed in our country? Why trickle down theory failed in our country? Okay, failed in India. That is the another point. Okay. Why trickle down theory failed in India? So this is the very important point, right, which can be asked. So the examination, or from the examination point of view, there can be the question, right? So what are the, or we can say, what is the trickle down approach of development, trickle down approach of economic development? So that can be the question. Approach of economic development, right? And due to what reasons, right? Due to what reasons the trickle down theory or the trickle down approach, right, failed to deliver in India, failed to deliver in India, right? So this can be the question from your examination point of view. I don't know whether you are practicing the answer writing or not, but that is required and that is very much important. I suggest you to practice the answer writing on regular basis, right? So if you don't practice the answer writing on regular basis, right, so you can study, right, you can say uh, a lot, right, but until and unless you practice the answer writing, uh, there can be the loss in examination, right? You can lose marks in your examination because practice is also important, right? So rehearsal before the marathon, that is important, right? So why down theory failed in India, right? The first point, that is, we can say that that is the over dependence on agriculture, over dependence on agriculture, right? This is what the experts say, right? This cannot be my personal view, right? But this is what the experts say. That is why we have to write it here, right? So because majority of the experts, economists are of the opinion that the reason behind the failure of the trickle down theory in India, that is the over dependence on agriculture, right? So if there is over dependence on agriculture, and there are two important things we can say, right? So one is the growth rate of agriculture sector. Okay, growth rate of agriculture remains restricted, because you cannot uh, you cannot raise the growth rate in agriculture sector beyond a certain level, right? So because it is all determined by the natural factor, right? So health of the soil, fertility of the soil is very much important factor in this, right? And there is the limit of the fertility of the soil, right? So beyond which you cannot take the produce, right? So this is very much important factor, that growth rate of agriculture remains restricted. So okay, so this is the point. So and when the growth rate of agriculture remains restricted, right? And the second important thing is that our policymakers, right, are looking at the Western model. While looking at the Western models, our policymakers are of the view that we should concentrate or focus more on the manufacturing sector, right? Until and unless the manufacturing sector is promoted in India, the agriculture sector cannot expect the boom. One thing is that because agriculture complements industry and the industry complements the agriculture. So whatever the experts think. So that is why the focus of the policymakers in India remained mainly on the industry sector, the manufacturing sector, right? So the focus of the government, right? The focus of the governments remained on, right? Remained on supporting the manufacturing sector to grow, right? The manufacturing sector to grow. Okay, that is the manufacturing sector to grow, right? So that means when the focus of the government remained on the manufacturing sector to grow, so then the agriculture sector, which is the backbone of the Indian economy, and on which more than 50% of India's population is depending, right? So that sector got neglected. That sector, you can say, took the back seat, you can say, right? So when that sector got neglected, so then what happened? The rate of agriculture growth, right, could not reach its natural potential, right? So rate of agricultural growth even, okay, rate of agricultural growth could not reach its natural potential, okay, could not reach its natural potential. So that's also very important point, okay, could not reach its natural potential. So that's a one important aspect, could not reach its natural potential. And as a consequence, what happened here, right? And as a consequence, what happened here? Those depending on agriculture, right? Uh, their position got worsened instead, right, of picking up, right? And the position led to the, you can say, farmer suicidal even. The condition led to the farmer suicidal even, right? Because let us suppose there is a farmer of the Vidarbha region of Maharashtra, right? Let us take an example, right? So a farmer is having, let's suppose, five children, right? One son and four daughters, let's suppose, right? Son is the youngest in the family, and due to the drought conditions there, the crop is not growing, right? So, or he is not getting enough from the agriculture, right? So now what is the problem? So due to the poverty in the family, his son could not get education, right? If his son could get education, then uh, he could not get the employment because of the lack of employment opportunities in the country, right? So this is the one problem, right? And the second thing is that the farmer has to marry his four daughters now, right? So for marrying the four daughters, right, the farmer needs money, right? And for that money, the farmer don't have the resources, right? He is depending on agriculture only, and due to the drought conditions in that region, right, you can say his agriculture is also in very poor condition. So his son is also not able to work due to the lack of education, or if he was able to provide education to his son, right, uh, right, able to facilitate his son to get the higher education, then he is sitting idle at home due to the lack of the opportunities in our country. So now at the time of marrying his daughters, right, so he don't have any income, right? He don't have any surplus, he don't have any savings, right? So at that time, he started thinking of generating the income for the marriage of the daughters, right? So he is having only one source, that is the agricultural land, right? So then he mortgage the agricultural land, or he take agricultural loans or some other types of loans, right, by mortgaging his agricultural land, right? So by this, you can say the burden of credit, right? So gets accumulated on the farmer, and ultimately he resort to the suicidal practice. right? So you can say, right? So if we, right, tell that family that see Indian economy is prospering, right? Indian economy is growing at the rate of 9%, right? So we are becoming world's number one economy. So what is the meaning of that? You can say, right, 9% growth to that family. So this is the real problem in our country, right? So that is why when the rate of agricultural growth could not reach its natural potential due to a number of problems, right? So the families depending on agriculture, right, they got excluded from the growth journey of the country, right? So that led to the growth urban oriented only. So that's the point, right? And the next thing is that in the wake of the climate, uh, in the wake of the right, in the wake of climate change, okay, in the wake of climate change, right, the risk of drought conditions, okay, risk of drought conditions or risk of droughts or floods is increasing, or floods is increasing, and due to that also, right, is increasing, and due to that also, right, the agriculture sector remains the poor performer, right? So that is why one point is that over dependence on agriculture, but the agriculture is being pushed into the dismal conditions, right, in our society, in our country. And that is why those who are depending on agriculture, right, so they got excluded from the growth journey of the country. So this is the one point, right? And the second point, which is important point, that is called the missing link, right? Missing link is the second important point. So as far as the missing link is concerned, right, let me tell you that if we look at the Western world, right, so actual growth journey of those countries were, first it was the primary sector, that means the agriculture, right? So then agriculture, from agriculture, they entered into the growth of the manufacturing, right? So from agriculture based economy, they they shifted into the manufacturing based economy, right? Manufacturing, right? And then you can say from that manufacturing based economy, right? So they shifted onto the service sector, right? So you can say this is the story, right? They shifted onto the services, right? Services. So we can say that actual, so what is the normal growth story or the natural growth story which we see in the Western countries? That is first picking up of agriculture, higher growth rate of agriculture, right? So then from agriculture, the economy got transitioned into the manufacturing sector. From manufacturing, right, comes the service sector boom, right? So this is the actual growth story of the Western world, right? But in India's case, there is one problem of the missing link. What is the missing link there? That manufacturing sector could not pick up to the uh, level expected, right? So we can say bypassing the this manufacturing sector, right? So after agriculture, right, service sector picked up in our economy, right? Service sector, right? From agriculture direct to service sector shift transition of the economy. So missing link is that of the manufacturing. And it is said that manufacturing sector is such a sector which generates the maximum employment, which generates the sustainable employment, which generates the permanent employment, right? So whatever employment agriculture sector generates, the employment generated by the agriculture sector, that is temporary employment, that is seasonal employment, right? So when there is the sowing season, harvesting season, at that time there will be a lot of employment right there. And once the crops are sown, then there are no, you can say that employment, right? So it means in agriculture sector, the employment remains seasonal, right? The employment remains temporary. That is why, right? So it is not permanent. And as far as the service sector is concerned, in service sector, the employment of the skilled manpower, right, that is there, right? And as far as the unskilled manpower is concerned, right, so those don't have any opportunity for the employment in the case of the service sector dominated economy, right? So that means in our country, right, so there is a very vast population, right, who is in the labor class, right, who don't have the skills, who don't have the necessary education, who don't have professional skills also. So that is why for those people, the service sector does not suit, right? There is no demand of those people in the service sector, right? And agriculture is not able to provide the permanent employment to those people. That is why only sector which can absorb them, that is the manufacturing sector, and manufacturing sector was bypassed by the growth journey of India, right? So this is the missing link which we can say, right? So that was bypassed by the growth journey of India, right? So now, uh, related to this, let me discuss with you one question, that what is the reason that the manufacturing sector was bypassed? What is the reason that services sector picked up in our economy before the manufacturing sector was, you can say, picked up, right? So the reason was that is, we can say, the high population in our country and lot of unemployment in our country. So that is why, right, when the economy of India was opened, so at that time, right, many of the developing economies, right, so they shift their, you can say, service basis in our country, right? Like business process outsourcing, knowledge process outsourcing, right? BPOs, KPOs. When the KPOs, when these things become popular with the globalization of the economy and with the introduction of the internet, right? Fast internet, you can say. So globalization. So in that era, right, so business process outsourcing and knowledge process outsourcing became popular, right? And in that context, the the developed economies of the world, right, they put their bases in our country, because here in our country the labor is cheap. One, labor means the manpower is cheap, right? Because even the we can say engineers here in our country, software engineers, hardware engineers, etc., right? So they are available at a the companies are able to hire them, right, for a remuneration which is very less as compared to which is required to be paid to them in USA or in other countries, right? So that is why this was the reason, because of the availability of manpower in our country, right? Because uh, the foreign companies had to impart them the requisite skills only, and those requisite skills are quite possible for them, are quite easy for them to provide to them. So, and their cost of operation, right, is reduced in India. So that is why they shifted their attention on India, and they set up their service bases in our country. And due to that reason, right, the service sector of India bypassed the manufacturing sector. And now the problem is what? Because agriculture and manufacturing sector both are complementary to each other, both complement to each other, right? So if there is a growth of the manufacturing sector, the growth of manufacturing sector supports the agriculture. How? Because for the industries, for the firms which are, you can say, uh, doing the manufacturing in our country, they need the raw material, and that raw material comes from the primary sector, that is the agriculture, right? So that is why if there will be more industry in our country, there will be more demand of agricultural produce. And if there is more demand of agricultural produce, the farmers would be able to get the remunerative prices for their agricultural produce, and that would lead to the betterment of their lives. So one thing is that, and the second thing is that if there is the manufacturing sector, if there is growth of manufacturing sector, then what is their labor would be required in the manufacturing activities, right? So if the labor would be required in the manufacturing activities, so that labor also would obviously shift from the agriculture sector to the manufacturing sector. So if that labor is shifted from the agricultural sector to manufacturing sector, then with that, the we can say the per capita, right? You can say produce in agriculture sector would increase obviously, right? And that would lead to the betterment of those who are depending on the agriculture. So that is the second thing there, right? And the third important thing is that uh, with the promotion of industry, or with the promotion of the manufacturing sector in our country, when the agriculture sector would grow, right, with the support of the manufacturing sector, so then what is there, right? So there will be increased consumption expenditure in our country, right? So if the consumption expenditure increases in our country, that would lead to higher demand, and the higher demand would promote the higher would promote the investment in our country. And if the investment is promoted, that would further lead to the more employment generation, and that would further lead to the more GDP, more output in our country, right? And more GDP, more output would be translated into the better standard of living of the people in our country. So that is there, right? And apart from that, the agriculture sector complements the manufacturing sector. How? Because the because with the promotion of the agricultural sector, with the improvement in the life conditions of those who are living on agriculture, right? So obviously the agriculture would also, right, undergo a transformation will be there in agricultural sector. What is the transformation? So agriculture would become more mechanized means if those who are depending on agriculture are you can say having sufficient income, so then they would resort to the more capital investment in the agriculture. And with more capital investment in agriculture, there would be higher need of the better seeds, right? High yielding varieties, and better technology, right? Better quality of inputs, right? Fertilizers, and other agricultural implements and machinery. So those agricultural implements, machinery, that fertilizer, that improved seeds, all those things will be provided by the industry to the agriculture. So that means the agricultural sector would support the manufacturing as well. So this is the problem of the missing link. So that is why, due to that missing link, because there is no manufacturing base in our country to, you can say, support the agriculture. So that is why, number one, the burden of a population on agriculture, right, remains higher, right? One point is that. And second thing is that there are less opportunities of selling the agricultural produce, right, for the manufacturing sector. So that is to the manufacturing sector, that is the second problem, right? So that is why there is the poor market of agricultural produce in our country. And due to the poor market of agricultural produce in our country, the farmers are not getting the remunerative prices, right? So this is the issue, right? This is the problem of the missing link, you can say, right? So this is quite I think this problem deserves to be you can say discussed in detail, right? So that is the next issue, right? So that means what is there. So as a consequence, the benefits of GDP growth could not percolate to the agriculture sector, could not percolate to the rural economy of the country, right? So these are the two fundamental problems which I have told you, right? That why the trickle down theory failed in our country, right? And rest problems, you can say that what is there, that is the you can say orthodox mindset also, and other problems which we'll discuss next, right? In the challenges to the inclusive growth that is there. Okay, so now what is there, the next thing is there, right? That is important, that is the now what is if the government, right, wants the manufacturing sector to be picked up in our country, right? So first and very important thing, right, for you can say the uh, for the growth, economic growth, allowing to percolate to the rural economy, allowing to percolate to the level of the agriculture sector, to the level of the labor class, we can say, to the level of the people living below poverty line, for allowing the growth to percolate to their level, what is required, right? The most fundamental important thing which is required, that is the connectivity, right? So the better the connectivity, right, the better will be the you can say condition in the rural sector of India, right? So what, for the connectivity, what is there? It is usually said that the roads and rail connectivity, right, are the gateways to the development of a country, right? Are the gateways to the development of a country. If a country does not have the adequate connectivity, is having the poor connectivity, right? So then the growth of that country, right, suffers due to that, right? So that is why, in the wake of that, that the roads and rail connectivity, that is the gateway to the economic development. So the government of India is focusing, right, sufficiently on the development of the roads and we can say highways, right? So first example is that we have developed the you can say golden quadrilateral concept of golden quadrilateral, which came, right? The concept of golden quadrilateral is to connect the four, you can say, uh, major cities of the India, of the country, that is Kolkata, Delhi, and Mumbai and Chennai, right, with the express highways. This is the golden quadrilateral, right? So apart from that, there is one north-south corridor. North-south corridor is from Srinagar to Kanyakumari, and there is one east-west corridor. East-west corridor is from Silchar to Porbandar, right? Silchar is in Arunachal Pradesh and Porbandar is in Gujarat, right? So this is the connectivity. One is this type of connectivity, we can say, right? So then, so the what is the planning of the government in our country, right? So let's suppose this is the I'm just taking it, right, uh, as an example to show you. This is not the real map of our country, you all know, right? So let's suppose there are, right, so in our country we are having the four stations, right? One station is here, let us suppose that is Delhi, and one station is here, that is Kolkata, and one station is here, that is, let us say, Mumbai, and one station is here, that is, let us say, Chennai, right? So the first effort of the government of India is to connect these all the four cities, right, with each other, right? So means this Delhi to Mumbai, and Mumbai to Chennai, and Chennai to Kolkata, right, and Kolkata to this Delhi, right? So this is the golden quadrilateral, right? So now the next important point there is, in terms of the golden quadrilateral is concerned, right? So the next important point is that there is north-south corridor, right? So as far as the north-south corridor is there, let's suppose here is a Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir, and here is Kanyakumari, right, at the southern end of the country, right? So a road will be there, right, which will connect this, we can say, Kashmir to Kanyakumari, right? So this is called the north-south corridor, right? And as far as the east-west connectivity is concerned, right? So in terms of the east-west connectivity, right? So there will be a road from this part of Arunachal Pradesh to, we can say, Gujarat, right? So this corridor, which is from Arunachal Pradesh to Gujarat, right? So that corridor is called the east-west corridor or west-east corridor, right? Which is from Silchar to Porbandar, right? So this is one thing, right? And apart from that, right, so all these roads, right, would be connected with the other roads, right? So that the port connectivity and the transportation of the goods, etc., should become easy and should become feasible and should be cost effective as well, right? And apart from that, the government of India has initiated another project which is known as the Bharat Mala project, right? So under the this Bharat Mala project, 50,000 kilometers of highways, right, are to be constructed across the country under the Bharat Mala project, right? 50,000 kilometers of the highways are to be constructed across the country, right? And it is said that the Bharat Mala project, right, is going to generate direct employment of 100 million, right, we can say man days, right, only in the construction of the 50,000 kilometer roads. One point is that. And the second point is that this as a, right, as a result of the, we can say, increased economic activity, right, triggered by the Bharatmala project, right, 22 million more jobs are expected to be created in our country. So this is a very good initiative of the government, we can say, right? If it is effectively implemented, we can say that is the next point, right? So far we have discussed that about the trickle down theory, that why the trickle down theory failed in our country, why it could not deliver in our country, what is the reason. We have discussed that also, and what is about the trickle down theory. I think everything is clear to you as of now, right? Are you getting me properly? Okay, right. So, so now the next thing which we are shifting, because I have told you that there are two approaches of that is the two approaches of development, right? One approach of development, I told you, that is the trickle down theory, right? One approach is the trickle down theory, which we have discussed in detail up to this point. I think you would be able to write an answer in the examination as well, right? So one is the trickle down approach or trickle down theory, we can say it, right? And the second approach that is there, that is the inclusive growth, right? That is the inclusive growth, right? That is the inclusive growth. Second thing is that, okay, inclusive growth. So this is a very important aspect as far as the India is concerned, right? Inclusive growth. So as we have discussed yesterday also and today also, we are going to discuss that when the trickle down theory failed to deliver in our country, then the focus of the government of the country shifted from trickle down approach to the inclusive growth approach, right? So it was in the, we can say, 11th 5-year plan in our country that the inclusive growth was, you can say, was much emphasized here in the country. Trickle down, inclusive growth was much emphasized in our country. It was after the, you can say, 11th 5-year plan, right? During the 11th 5-year plan, right? So even the agenda of the 11th 5-year plan was also the, right, inclusive growth. That was the main agenda of the 11th 5-year plan. We will discuss all those things later on, right, with this. So what I mean to say that inclusive growth is such a growth which is more broad based, right? Which is more broad based, right? And the inclusive growth is that growth, the benefit of which is delivered to, or the fruits of which are tasted by, right, even the person who is sitting at the bottommost level, right? Till the far end of the economy, right? The fruits of the growth are tasted by, right? Till the far end of the economy. We say that growth is the inclusive growth. Okay. So that means what is the purpose of the growth? What is the purpose of the development, particularly in the democratic setups, right? Why the governments are elected? If we see that the people of a country elect their government in a democratic society, like in our country, right? To elect the representatives, right? Who should act as their trustees, and right? So they are given the responsibility of managing the natural resources of the country, right? They are the trustees of the resources of the people, right? Of the country in the wisest manner possible, right? In the very in the best possible manner, right? So as to uh, you can say harvest the benefits from the natural resources, and to ensure that the benefits of those natural resources are divided, right, uh, on the basis of justice, right, among all the citizens of the country. So that is the basic purpose of the democracy, we can say, right? So it means democracy means the development of all, right? So development till the far end of the country. So that is why we people make them our trustees, right? So all are same in the democratic setup, because we, when we vote, all of us are having the same right to vote, right? Even single right to vote, right? Even right to cast one vote in one election, right? That is enjoyed by the person who is sitting at the lowest strata in the society, and the same benefit is enjoyed by the person who is sitting at the very top in the society. That is the Mukesh Ambani, we can say, right? So that is why he is also casting one vote. We are also casting one vote. So in the democratic setup, we are all equal, right? There can be economic differences. That is a separate thing. So that is why the duty of the government is to make it sure that the growth should be broad based, growth should be for all, right? Growth should be meaningful for all. Growth should be for masses, not for classes. So that is the that is the very obvious purpose of the government, and should be very obvious purpose of the government of a democratic society. And it means all the resources are managed and all the resources are harvested. The benefits from the resources are harvested, what, for the well-being of the citizens, right? So that means when we talk about the inclusive growth, right? So inclusive growth means, right, does not mean, see, there are the two types of people. One is such type of people who are, we can say, the industrialists, corporates in the manufacturing sector, right? One is that rich and poor, right? So we can say, so the other type of people are the poor people, right? So there can be the two strategies. One is the focus of the government, right, can be entirely on this class, right, to facilitate this class, to promote this class, to provide the maximum opportunities to this class, because this class, right, contributes into the output of the economy. This class contributes into the GDP growth, and that is why one strategy can be that let us, right, you can say, increase the GDP. Let us show it to the public that, see, right, how prosperous our economy is. So one can be that, right? And the second approach can be, you can say, covering each and everybody, right? So the second thing is this, right? The focus on each and everybody, right? So when we when we talk about this particular strategy only, right? This particular strategy, right? So this is called the exclusive growth, exclusive of the right masses, right? Growth for classes only, not for masses, right? So one point is that, and when we talk about this particular strategy, then by this strategy we mean that growth for all, right? Irrespective of one is rich or one is poor, right? The benefits of growth should be delivered to all, will be delivered to all, right? So that is there, right? So inclusive growth. So when we talk about the inclusive growth, so there is one point which is important here, which I would like to write here, right? One is that growth should benefit the people by large, right? So any growth should benefit the common people by large. Any growth should benefit the common people by large, right? Common people by large, okay, by and large. So that is the one point, right? So this is the one thing. And the second important thing about the inclusive growth is that more broad-based benefits of growth, okay? More broad-based benefits of growth, okay? So this is the second important point, right? So as far as the broad-based benefits of growth are concerned, we don't say that in India, the fruits of the growth are tasted by you also, right? Okay, so everybody at the lower level, which is at the lower middle or the mm, down from the lower middle also, they feel that mm, yes, the government is right uh, saying that India is growing, Indian economy is healthy, there is no problem to Indian economy, right? But we are living in the pains, right? We have the pains, right? So we are suffering. So we all feel that no, there is something wrong, right? Which the government is saying, because the benefits of that growth are not delivered to our level, right? So more broad-based benefits of growth should be there. And third point is that growth should have orientation towards the masses, not classes. That's important point. Okay, growth should have orientation towards masses, not classes. Okay. Towards masses, not classes. So this is there, right? So, but in our uh, country, this problem remains quite obvious, right? And it is still there in our country, all right? And the next thing is that, right, as far as the inclusive growth is concerned, if we talk about the, mm, if we talk about, we can say the two things. One is the, right, one is the era before liberalization, right? Pre-economic reform era. Let me take here 1990 as the watershed year, right? So one period is after that, one period is before that, because from 1990s, a new era started in our Indian economy. Everybody knows about that. Okay. So era of privatization, globalization, liberalization. Everybody knows about that. So one is this era, right? So in the pre-liberalization era, right? So we were talking about the three terms, three things. One term was that was the growth, right? So second term was development, right? And growth, development, and the third term was that equitable distribution, right? So in the pre-liberalization era, these were the three common words, these were the three common terms, right? So I can say here, equitable distribution, right? So these are the three important points, right? So one is the growth, right? Second is the translation of that growth into the development, right? So growth, as I told you, right? Yesterday I was having rupees 1,000 in my pocket. Today I am having 10,000 in my pocket. So there is the growth, right? 10 times growth is there, right? But yesterday also I was, you can say, begging food. Today also I am begging food. Yesterday also I was sleeping on footpath. Today also I am sleeping on footpath. Yesterday also I was wearing torn clothes. Today also I am wearing the torn clothes. So that means it is only growth. There is no development at all, right? So how to translate it into development means, if my income has increased 10 times, right, then whether I am making my own food today, right, whether I am living under roof today, right, so whether I am focusing on my health today, whether I am focusing on my education today, right, whether I am focusing on the health, education, and other necessities of those who are in my family. So that is the development basically. So the challenge is to translate growth into the development, right? So growth is another, is one aspect. Growth means right, rise in the quantitative terms, right? Like a plant, right? If a plant is only getting longer and longer, right? So, right, it is increasing, let's suppose, right, 10 centimeter every day. So 10 centimeter increase every day, right? That is a quantitative growth, right? But the growth of that plant would be meaningful for the owner of that plant only and only if that plant is delivering the fruits also, right? If that plant is only growing, right, and consuming the resources, means water, right, inputs of fertilizer, etc., nutrients from the soil it is extracting, but it is not giving any fruit, right? So then this is meaningless for that owner. So similar is the story of the growth and development, right? So that is the point, right? So once we have translated the growth into development, then the next challenge is how to make it sure that the development should be equitably distributed, right? There should be justice-based distribution of the fruits of growth, which is called the development, right? Justice-based. So that is the third challenge before the government, right? So that was there, right? And what is we can say the inclusive growth, right? In the first decade of the 21st century, which is around the 2007, 8, 9, right? So what we have did, right? So all the three, right? All the three have been, right, combined into one set. All the three have been combined into one set, right? Which has been given the name of inclusive growth. Okay, which has been given the name of inclusive growth. I think this is quite clear to you, which has been given the name of inclusive growth. So this is what we mean by the inclusive growth, right? So inclusive growth, right, covers all these three. All these three means one is the growth, right, ensuring growth. Second is the development, translating the growth into development. And third is the equitable distribution of growth, right? Combining all the three, right, into one. Combining all the three into one, we can say that this is the term which is known as the inclusive growth, right? So it means inclusive growth, right, is not a new term, right, which has a, you can say, come from the heavens, right, all of a sudden fall. And it is not like that, right? It is only the previous terms, right? So which have been, you can say, combined together to make a new term, which has been given the name of the inclusive growth, right? So it means now we are seeing all the three in a single perspective, right? You can say as in a single context, that is the context of inclusive growth, right? So it is uh, on the one side focusing on the growth, also on the second side focusing of the translation of growth into development also, and on the third angle, right, focusing on the equitable distribution of that benefit of the fruits of growth, that is the development also. So this is basically the inclusive growth we can see here. Okay, so I think this point is again clear to you that what is the inclusive growth. Okay, so the next important thing which is here about this inclusive growth, if I would like to tell you, right? So here is a, we can say the meaning of the inclusive growth, right? So as it was taken in our 11th five-year plan, I told you that 11th five-year plan was that, just one second, one important call is coming. Let me. Right. So the further on this point is that, okay, do you need any break of 3 minutes or not? Are you comfortable? Hello? Hello? Are you comfortable or need break? No, it is up to you. It's not from my end. Asika, Aman, do you need break for 2 minutes or not? Please tell me. Okay. Okay,
Oh, sir.
okay, you can have break for 2 minutes. Okay, right. If you want, not an issue, right? So please have a break for 2 minutes. Hello, are you back, beta? Can we start? Okay. So now as far as because we were discussing about the inclusive growth, right? So according to 11th five-year plan, right? 11th five-year plan. So one point is that the theme of the 11th five-year plan was theme of 11th five-year plan was right. So what was the theme of the 11th five-year plan was? That was the towards faster and more inclusive growth, right? So theme was towards faster and more inclusive growth. That was the theme of the 11th five-year plan, right? So this shows the commitment of the government towards the inclusive growth, right? And the next thing, uh, inclusive growth was defined in 11th five-year plan as was defined in 11th five-year plan as. So what is the inclusive growth according to the 11th five-year plan? So according to that plan, right, the inclusive growth is a growth process. It, inclusive growth is a growth process, like me right, is a growth process, okay, which yields, right, which yields broad-based benefits and ensures broad-based benefits and ensures quality of opportunity for all, right? Ensures quality of opportunity for all, okay? Opportunity for all. So that is what is the inclusive growth according to the 11th five-year plan. So the same things we have discussed earlier also, right? So now the next important issue or the next important point which we are going to discuss. So far we have tried to understand the concept of the inclusive growth, right? So now we can say that inclusive growth, right, is the growth which leads to, right? So inclusive growth is the growth which leads to what? Which leads to number one. What is that? That is the employment opportunities for masses. Employment opportunities for masses at, at every level. Okay? For masses at every level. This is the one thing, right? At every level, providing, comma, providing means of livelihood, right? Means of livelihood, right? You can say such as income, means of livelihood such as income, right? So increase in purchasing power, increase in purchasing power, right? And improving the well-being, improving the well-being of all, okay? Improving the well-being of all, okay? Of all, right? So, and it should, it should contribute in reducing the absolute poverty among masses. Absolute poverty among masses, right? So I'm writing, so I have written here these some important points. One is the inclusive growth is the growth that provides employment opportunities, right, for masses, okay, for masses at every level. So one point is that, right? So employment opportunities for masses, not for classes only, right? So second is the providing means of livelihood, right, at a broader scale, right, such as income, increase in purchasing power, improving the well-being of all, right, and reducing the absolute poverty among the masses, right, because there are two concepts of poverty. One is the relative poverty, second is the absolute poverty, right? By absolute poverty, we mean that a person should be able to fulfill at least the basic necessities of life. That is called the right. So those persons who are not able to fulfill the basic necessities of the life, they are known as absolutely poor people, right? So the level of absolute poverty is the level of income, right, which is that minimum threshold level of income which is required to meet the basic necessities of life. So that is known as the absolute poverty level, right? And the persons who are living below that, they are those persons who are absolutely poor persons, who are not even managing to, uh, we can say, meet their basic necessities, right? Fulfill their basic necessities. So one very important point related with this is this point, that is the uh, this you can see, right? So absolute poverty, right? To end the absolute poverty, to reduce the absolute poverty at least, right? And the second important thing is there, that is reducing the inter-regional and intra-regional inequalities. This is the summing up of that, right? We have discussed all these points earlier also. Intra-regional inequalities, this is the second point. No need to explain it in detail here, right? And the third point is, that is the creating opportunities for skill development, creating opportunities for skill development, because or skill development, right? So many of the people are unemployed because they are not employable, right? So to make the unemployed employable, that is the first job, right? So it means what is there, right? So we can say that on the one side, these are the unemployed people who are sitting here, right? This is a group of unemployed people, right? And on the other side, right? So here is the list of opportunities, right? So opportunities are also existing there, right? Almost enough to absorb all the unemployed, we can say, right? But there is a gap between the unemployed and the opportunities, right? There is a gap between the unemployed and the opportunities. So what is that gap, right? What the unemployed are having, that is not required to grab the, that is not sufficient to grab the opportunities, and what the opportunities demand, right, that is lacking with the unemployed people, right? So what is that, that is that, right? So what the opportunities demand and which is lacking with the unemployed people, that is called, that makes the unemployed people unemployable, right? That makes people unemployable. Why? Because opportunities are there, but they are not fulfilling the requirements to grab those opportunities. That is why they are right excluded, because they are not having the sufficient what is required to grab the opportunities. Right. So it means right, if if we want these persons also included into the growth journey of the country, then what is there? There is an important need. What is the important need? That is to make them employable according to the uh, demand, right? That is to make them employable, right? So when we talk about making them employable, then what is important here? To make someone employable means to fetch someone the necessary skill, right? To fetch them the necessary skills, okay? To fetch them the necessary skills, okay? So that is important thing, right? So that is why skill development is an important concept, is an important component of the inclusive development, inclusive growth, right? So the next thing is, we can say, that is the better dispersal of industries, right? So better dispersal of industries means, right? Better dispersal of industries means industries should be dispersed throughout the country, right? These should not be concentrated in one part of the region. That is also one important point, right? And the next point is, that is the increased agro-based industries, because our economy is agriculture based. So that is also required, right? Increased agro-based industries, okay? Increased agro-based industries, that is again required here, right? And the next point is that a gradual shift from economic dependence on agriculture. This is the next point. A gradual shift from economic dependence on agriculture, okay? Shift from economic dependence on agriculture. Economic dependence on agriculture, that is the next requirement, okay? So this is again very much important aspect. Gradual shift from economic dependence on agriculture, right? And the next point is that it means there is the employment driven, right? uh, Growth. So that is there, right? Employment oriented growth should be there, right? Because there are two approaches of growth. One is the capital intensive, second is the labor intensive. So it should be employment oriented growth, right? The next is we can say increased vocational employment also. So these are the some of the suggestions. We can say that inclusive growth which leads to all these things, right? It means an inclusive growth, right? Means a growth which generates employment, which brings means of livelihood for you people, which increase your purchasing power, which increase your well-being, and which reduce the absolute poverty. That is the inclusive growth, right? A growth which reduces the interregional and intra-regional inequalities. That is the inclusive growth. A growth which creates opportunities for skill development of the masses. That is also the inclusive growth. A growth that is focused at the dispersal of industries throughout the country. A growth that is focused on the agro-based industries, right? A growth that is focused on shift from shift from economic dependence on agriculture. So that is there, okay? So that is there basically, okay? So the next thing is that if we want to ensure the inclusive growth, there is a very much important point which needs to be concentrated here, which needs to be focused here, that the governments need to change their perception of this growth, right? Governments need to change their perception of growth, because economists cannot do anything, academicians cannot do anything, intellectuals cannot do anything, a single citizen or an individual from the public can't do anything until and unless the government leads the journey, right? So, to make it sure that the government should lead the journey, so the state and the central government needs to change their perception of the growth, right? Perception that is there, right? So, what the governments can do, governments can help in the inclusive growth in a number of ways. In a number of ways, we mean that first of all, the governments need to provide, the governments can provide an enabling environment, right, for the inclusive growth. Because we know that inclusive growth requires skill development. Inclusive growth requires, you can say, uh, more employment generation, more opportunities, right? So, shift from agriculture to manufacturing. For that particular thing, manufacturing sector needs to be picked up, and to help the manufacturing sector to pick up, right, investment is required, and the investor friendly laws are required, right? So safety and security of the investment of the private investors who are investing either from our country or they are coming from outside the country, that is required to be right ensured. And moreover, the basic problems in our society, like the problem of corruption, lack of transparency, etc., right? And that is, we can say, red tape, right? Uh, which is the problem in the bureaucracy, right? So that should be addressed. And like single window clearance, various laws which should be supportive to the investors, etc. Such things are required to be introduced there, right? So that is what we can say, that the government needs to provide an enabling environment in terms of the political environment, in terms of the economic environment, in terms of the social environment, right? Social employment environment includes the law and order problems, right? Like we can say, these socio-political things, issues are there. Like we can say, if the problem of Naxalism is not tackled, right? So then no investor would be ready to go into the Naxal hit areas for the investment. So those areas would remain excluded. That particular set of population would remain excluded from the growth, right? So that is why that is also one fundamental necessity, right? Like we can say in Jammu and Kashmir, right? Until and unless the militancy is there, right? So nobody would like to go to invest there in that state, right? So that means what is there in that union territory, we can say what is there. So it means that union territory would remain excluded, right? Despite the you can say everything may be there, right? And similarly, we are having the border issues with Pakistan, we are having the border issues with China, right? And until and unless the border issues are resolved with China, so the growth of Northeast, the growth of Sikkim, right? So we can say no private investor would be ready to go to the Arunachal Pradesh near the border of China. No private investor would be ready to go and invest in the Sikkim near the border of China, right? No private investor would be ready to go to the that Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh region, right? Because of the problems with Pakistan, problems with China, right? And uh, in the border areas of Punjab, in the border areas of Rajasthan, in the border areas of Gujarat, that development would take backseat because of the border issues, right? And that is why those areas would remain excluded. So this is what the government can do to support the inclusive growth, right? So the second important point is, I'm not writing. Is it okay with you? Hello? Is it okay with you? Because I am not writing so that we may finish the topic, right? Asika, is it okay with you? Okay, fine. Okay. So this is the one point, right? And the second thing what the government can do, that is to ensure the connectivity, road connectivity, rail connectivity, right? So far we can say we are talking about the inclusive growth, right? Let's suppose Haryana, Punjab, right, is producing milk, right? And the consumption of milk is not as per the production, or the demand for milk is not as per the production, let's suppose in the state of Punjab, right? So then we have to send the milk from Punjab to the rest of the areas of the country, right? So if let's suppose we are to supply milk from Punjab to Mumbai, right? So for that purpose, what is required? So we can say, right, air conditioned wagoners are required with the railway, but railway is lacking that, right? So direct connectivity from Punjab to Mumbai is required, right? So such things are required there. So that is why road connectivity, better road connectivity, so that those things which are having very short shelf life, those could be delivered uh, right as fast as possible. One point is that. And second thing, if the connectivity is better, so that promotes the economy, right? So that leads to the cut in the uh, various costs, right? Like cost of transportation would be reduced, and if the cost of transportation is reduced, that means the price which is charged from the consumer, that would become low. So that will lead to the right widening the base of the consumers in the country, right? And that could help making the Indian industry more competitive globally as well. And if the Indian industry is made more competitive globally, then what is there? Then the export from India would increase. And if the export from India increases, and if the demand for the India made products are there in the market abroad, so then obviously the production activities would pick up in our country, manufacturing would pick up in our country, and that would lead to more employment generation and more inclusion of the already excluded people, right? So that is another important point which should be uh, taken care, right? And next is ensuring accessibility and we can say affordability of the public services, accessibility and affordability of public services, right? Public services means public health and education. These are two important things, right? So because for the inclusion of more and more people into the growth journey of the country, one thing is that they should be uh, fertile minds, right? They should be skilled, they should be employable, and it is education and skill training that can make them employable. So that is why there should be a focus on education, and education should be made accessible to everybody, right? One thing is that. And the second thing is that health facilities, right? So health facilities should be, because health is very much important factor as far as the you can say output one person can provide, right? So that is why a person's productivity depends on the health status of that person, physical health as well as the mental health. So to improve the physical and mental health, we can say that primary health care is very much important, right? So that is why it should be there, right? So that is the next thing, right? But this is my personal view that if we really want the inclusive growth, then at least the public health and education should be nationalized, because the exclusion starts from here, right? Exclusion starts from the primary education itself, right? So how, right? One student is uh, taking his primary education from a very backward region in the state of UP, right? In a village. where the staff is not adequate, where the building is not adequate, right? And where the other facilities are lacking. And one child from the urban center, right, is studying in India's top school. So, how can we compare these two children, right? So, that means exclusion starts from the very basic level. And if we really want the inclusive growth, then at least the education should be at par for everybody. And similarly, health should be at par for everybody, right? So poor cannot afford the right heavy cost of getting treatment in, let's suppose, the Fortis hospital, right? In, let's suppose, some other hospitals, right, which are being run by the corporate in our country. That is very costly. So that is why, and moreover, the health facilities are not sufficient in our country, particularly if we talk about the health facilities in the tertiary sector, right? So all the uh, public institutions like PGI at Lucknow, right? AIMS at Delhi, PGI at Chandigarh, right? So those are overcrowded, right? So there it is not possible for you to get the treatment immediately, right? You have to take the appointment, you have to wait for a number of days, etc., etc. So that means this is these are the examples of exclusion itself, right? Okay, so that's there, and that's the point, right? So the next thing is that public utilities, right? So as far as the public utilities are concerned, that is sanitation, that is drinking water, that is electricity. Those should be provided to each and everybody, to every household. It should be made sure, right? As we have already discussed, that in the rural uh, part of the country, right? So one thing is electricity. That is a big problem. If there is connection, then electricity is not supplied 24 into 7. In the urban center, electricity is provided 24 into 7, right? And there are many villages of the country where the groundwater is not drinkable, right? And because that's not fit for health, and mm, but they don't have the right, you can say, connections, water connections, right? So they are facing the problem of supply of the drinkable water, right? Safe drinking water, that is there. And similarly, sanitation is also another problem, right? So development of the public goods, more and more public goods needs to be developed for the inclusion, right? And the next thing is that that is, we can say, the ITIs of the country where the skill development is provided, that also needs to be, those also needs to be, right, we can say, promoted, right? And their conditions should be improved, workshops there should be improved, right? Necessary equipment should be provided to those institutions, so that those institutions should be able to provide the world class manpower, right, which is required there. And the next is a policy framework for investment, for improving the investment by the private sector, right? So the country should have a adequate policy, should have a sufficient policy, so that the private sector investment can be promoted in the country, right? Because we have seen that there are limitations of the government sector. They cannot invest beyond a certain extent, right? But as far as the needs of the country are concerned, seeing the population and all there, right? So a huge capital investment is required in our country for building infrastructure and other things, etc. So without the capital investment, the dream of inclusion cannot be materialized. So that is why, to materialize the or to realize this, we can say, dream of inclusion, it is required that more and more capital investment should be made, right? Effective capital investment should be there. So for that purpose, the private sector is required to be involved, and for the involvement of the private sector, it is required that they should be provided security, safety of investment, and moreover, there should be a proper policy framework to win the confidence of the private investors, right? So until and unless there is a stable policy of the government, the private investors would not be confident enough to invest in our country, and they would avoid, right, coming into India. And the next thing is that that is we can say uh, more focus on creation of direct employment opportunities, right? Direct employment opportunity, as we see the Manrega, that is providing the direct employment opportunity. Though I may not be agree with this, but still, because this is one of the strategy which was chalked out by the government to ensure the inclusive growth of the country, right? To, you can say, deliver the growth benefit towards the you can say lower strata in the rural area, right? Because how this works, because government collects the money in the form of the taxes from the rich people, right? And part of that money is delivered to the poor people, right, in the form of the uh, right employment under the Manreka, right? So this is how the government is trying to percolate the money or to shift the money of the rich towards the poor for the betterment of the poor, for the benefit of the poor. So here I mean to say, right, what the economists say that more and more Manreka like direct employment opportunities needs to be created, right? And the next and most important point is that focus on the, we can say, enabling government. There are two models of government. One is the disabling model of government. Second is the enabling model of government, right? So disabling model of government is that model, right, which provides you a number of things free of cost, right, that makes you disabled, that kills your dreams, that kills your ambitions, right? So, right, like various schemes of the government which were introduced in our country, even in the UP state, in the Punjab state, in some other state also. So, a lot of the freebies are being offered by the government, right? So, what is that? That is a disabling model of government, right? Instead of providing them employment, instead of investing that money in generating employment, instead of investing that money to empower them to stand on their own feet, right? So the government is following the disabling path of government. What is the disabling path of government? Government is not providing them employment. Government is not making sure their empowerment. Instead, the government is, you can say, right, providing them only the food, right, and such type of other things what are basically required, right, and to allow them to stay free, to sit free, right? So that is the disabling model of government, right? Like we can say here, that is the free, we can say, flour, free pulses, right? Free wheat, free rice, providing provision of that. So that is the disabling model of government that kills the self-respect of the recipient also. All right. So that is why if we follow the spirit of the constitution, that a dignified life is required. So for dignified life, it is required that you should earn your own food, basically, at least, right? You should be able to earn your own basic necessities, right? Instead of sitting on the, we can say, arms by the government, or on sitting off the, we can say, arms by somebody else, right? So that is the disabling model of government. So government should should shift from disabling to enabling model of government. That is important point here, right? And the next thing is that right, so what are the you can say aims, right, before the government at this stage? As far as the aims before the government are concerned, one is the employment promotion, if the government wants to ensure the economic growth, inclusive growth, then the one important thing is government should focus on the employment generation. But in our country, what we are seeing, the status of employment is very poor, right? Unemployment is raising its head in our country instead of employment, right? So the next thing is poverty reduction. We have discussed this also. Balanced regional development. We have discussed this also. And next is the improvement in the human development. So basically, the ultimate goal of inclusive growth, that is the human development, to raise the level of consumption, right? To make them able to live a better life, right? To make them able to live in a secured environment, right? So that is the ultimate goal of this inclusive growth. Or otherwise, there is no need, right, to do all this exercise, right? So that's there, right? So now, basically, to achieve these uh, basic things, right, which are the four things, which is employment, poverty reduction, balanced regional growth, and improvement in the human development, right? For all these, what is there, right? So one thing is required, that is the higher national income growth. That is the fundamental necessity. But only the higher growth cannot do all, right? So it should be supplemented by the equitable distribution of the benefits of growth, right? So we can say that the bigger aims before the government, or the bigger, you can say, job before the government is reduce the rate of unemployment in the country, right? By creating more employment opportunities, right? Attack on the poverty. That is the second thing. Third is to ensure the regional growth, regional development, balanced regional growth. And fourth is the uh, improvement in the human development, right? So for all these things, uh, it is beyond a doubt that the higher level of national income, the higher GDP growth is must, is necessary. But the higher GDP growth will not serve the purpose. Only the higher GDP growth will not serve the purpose unless it is accompanied by the equitable distribution of the benefits of growth. So that is required, right? So that is basically required here, right? So now we can say that to help India achieve its goals of the higher economic growth. So what is important there, right? What is important there? What we should do? The basic things, yes. So what basic things we can do? One is we should focus on eliminating the child labor, right? When the child labor will be eliminated, so then the children of the country would be shifted to the schools. And if they are shifted to the schools, from there, their inclusion would start, right? So until and unless child labor prevails in our country, the parents of the children who are very poor, right? So they would prefer to send their children on work instead of sending to them for school, right? Because if they go on work, they would bring rupees 10, 20 or so at home by the evening, and that would contribute into the income of the family, right? Which is living in a very bad condition. So that is why the preference of the parents would remain the would be to send their children on job instead of to school, right? So therefore, the uh, process of inclusion would start with the end of the child labor. One point is that, right? And the second point is that equal opportunities to women, right? So in India, if we see in terms of the political inclusion, if we see in terms of the social inclusion, in terms of the economic inclusion, right? So women are largely excluded, right, from the growth journey of the country in we can say every respect, right? Women are approximately equal in terms of population to the men, right? Little gap is there. so equal in terms of population to the men. But as far as the distribution of opportunities is concerned, so that distribution of opportunities is quite lopsided, right? So that is unjustified, right? That is in favor of the men only, that is not in favor of the women. So that means if the large section of the society, which is the women, right, the a significantly large section of the society, which is the women, if they remain excluded, so then the benefits of the growth, right, would not percolate towards the bottom, right? It means the women would remain excluded, right? The inclusion of women would remain a challenge for us. So that is why this is important point, right? And the next thing is removal of the caste barriers. There are the caste barriers due to which the people of certain castes remain disadvantaged. One point is that. And now there is a one more problem which is emerging in our country, that is exclusion of the minorities also, right? So caste based caste barriers or the exclusion of minority from certain opportunities, that is also a big problem which is emerging in the country. So because India is a country which is having a number of minorities living in the country, so if the minorities are not secure here, if the minorities are not included here, right, they remain excluded from a number of opportunities, so then it's really a problem for the country. So we cannot achieve the uh, that we cannot realize the dream of the inclusive growth without this. The next thing is that improvement in the work culture. So work culture improvement is also important because there are many persons who are who stay away from the work due to the poor work culture in our country, particularly women, right? They, you can say, stay away from work because the work culture is very poor in our country, right? So that is the problem. Next is the agricultural reforms are required. As far as the agricultural reforms are concerned, one is the agricultural marketing, though the government has introduced the e-NAM also as far as the agricultural marketing is concerned. Okay, and the next thing is redistribution of agricultural land. That is the biggest requirement because though the land reforms were introduced in our country after the independence of the country, but those land reforms have not been fully implemented in various states of the country. So therefore, the redistribution of land is very much required, right? And one important step which this government has taken, that is the we can say, right, so Aadhaar registration of every land holding. That is the new initiative by the government, right? So the government is planning by the end of March 2022 that every land holding in the country will have a unique, you can say, number, like we can say Aadhaar, right? And the government would have a proper record of the uh, every land holding, right? Even the you can say latitudes, longitudes would also be recorded of of every piece of land, right, which is held by someone. And with that, I think the Benami lands which are there, agricultural lands which are there, right? So those may uh, be exposed and those may be redistributed, right? So that is the next point. Okay. And the next thing is that effective implementation of land reforms and tenancy laws. Whatever the land reforms or tenancy laws are there already existing, those needs to be effectively implemented because the tenancy laws, right, are implemented to some extent, to a reasonable extent, in the southern part of the country, like the state of Tamil Nadu, state of Kerala, right? So they introduced this. But as far as the northern states are concerned, Punjab, Haryana, UP, right? So in these states, the tenancy laws were not introduced, were not implemented, though the laws were made. So that's there, right? And the next thing is that, which is most important thing, that is tackling corruption at the higher level, right? So due to the corruption at the higher level, the benefits of growth are not percolating downwards. You know that we have already discussed in some class that as far as the public distribution system is concerned, due to the high prevalence of corruption at the higher levels, at the bureaucratic level, etc., right? So there are the some states where even the less than 50%, right, uh, reaches to the beneficiaries, and the rest of the entire part that is consumed uh, and ruled, right? So, though the government has, you can say, introduced the direct benefit transfer scheme, right? So, due to that, this problem seems to be tackled to larger extent, but still more needs to be done in this respect, right? So, that is the point. And the next thing is that that is the electoral reforms, right? Because the electoral system in our country has evolved into such a manner that it's a very, very costly affair. And for the political leaders, expenditure in elections is like an investment, right, in some business venture, right? So they invest the money openly, very open-heartedly, you can say, right? And after winning the election, they try to, right, you can say, uh, again collect that money from the various sources, right? So that leads to, that brings the corruption, first of all, at the higher level, even at ministerial level, at higher levels. One point is that. And the second point is that due to the very heavy expenditure in the elections, which is in our country, so that leads to the, you can say, emergence of the crony capitalism in our country, right? And this is the example of the crony capitalism which we are seeing in our country at present, right? So we can say, if the crony capitalism is there, if there is a nexus between the industrialists and the politicians, so then what is there? Obviously, the politicians, right, would make the policies which are in favor of the industrialists, in favor of the corporate, not in favor of the masses, but in favor of the classes, right, which is happening at present in our country, right? So all this is because the corporate and the politicians and the bureaucracy, they have a symbiotic relationship, right? So they serve the interests of each other. So that is why the, uh, you can say, the great uh, share of population which is there, that remains excluded from the growth, right, benefits. So that's there, right? And the next thing is to promote the equality at all levels, right? As I told you, that it is better if the health and education are nationalized, because the exclusion starts at this level. This is the very fundamental level where the exclusion starts, right? And the next is, we can say, rapid rural growth that is required, right? So it is better if we follow the model suggested by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, which is the Pura model, providing urban amenities to the rural areas, right? So that was important, very important model in that respect. So the next thing is that is the, we can say, a democratic development should be there, right? So usually whatever is there, as we are seeing the present situation, as far as the uh, agricultural laws are concerned, right? The farmers are sitting on the outskirts of Delhi and they are protesting for more than 4 months now, right? What is the primary reason behind that? That the way of, right, making the laws, that was not democratic, right? So the government brought the bills because they were having a sufficient majority in the parliament. So that is why they just pushed the bills to be enacted in the parliament, right? And even though that, you can say, even no committee was formed right there, right, to study that bill, right? So, and even the opposition was not given the adequate hearing, right, as far as the bills were concerned. Even the other stakeholders were not involved in that, right? Even the economists were not involved in that. So that is the undemocratic way of development, which is there, that whatever the ruler thinks that is in the interest of the country, the ruler does that only. And the people at the grassroots level, they are not involved into the democratic, the, into the decision making process. So that means political exclusion is also there. And if the political exclusion is there, that leads to the economic exclusion as well, right? So that is why this should be improved. And the next thing is that targeted urban growth. Urban growth is also required, because in urban areas also there are a lot of problems related with the that sanitation problem. That is a very big problem in the slums, in the slum parts of the cities, right? So in urban centers, if you go towards that area where the slum dwellers are there, so there you will find a very poor condition of the roads, very poor condition of the sanitation, hygienic conditions, right? So those will be very poor, and connectivity as far as the water and electricity, that will also be poor in terms of that, right? So that is the total exclusion we can say, right? So we should think about that also, because the slum developers are also contributing a lot into the development of the city. They are those people, right? So who are doing a number of jobs in the city, right? So they are supporting the industry also to pick up. So that is why they needs to be supported, right? So that is the another point, right? And the next important point there is, that is, you can say, next important point is, that is the infrastructure development, because without infrastructure development, the economic growth cannot be picked up. And without the economic growth being picked up, the employment cannot be uh, generated, right? So it means picking up of economic growth and making it broad based, that is the fundamental necessity for the inclusive growth, right? So that should be there. And next is the ensuring future energy needs. That is very much important, right? So if we want the inclusive growth to make sustainable, right? And the last point is the good governance. Everybody knows about the good governance. This is not a new thing, right? And the next thing is that rural India is facing some particular problems. The particular problems which are being faced by the rural India are, that is the one is the degradation of land. The government should make efforts towards that, because if the land is being degraded, obviously the productivity will fall. If the productivity is falling, obviously those who are living on the agriculture, they would remain excluded, right? They would not be able to enjoy the benefits of the growth. And the second thing is that that is the, we can say, increasing threats from drought and floods in the wake of the climate change, because the climate change is threatening the agriculture sector as well, right? Because we have seen that there is change in the weather patterns, right? In some places there is extreme drought conditions we find, and in some places we find the uh, you can say, no, the abnormal flood conditions also, right? So all those lead to the crop damage, right? All those lead to the you can say, all those affect the sowing, all those affect the harvesting also. So that is why these problems need to be tackled, should be given the due attention. The government needs to focus on these, right? And the next thing is that land holding are shrinking. This is a true story of India, because the population is rising and the land is shrinking. Land is shrinking. One thing is that due to the growing urbanization, due to the fast pace of infrastructure development, due to the fast industrialization which the government is trying, right? So due to all those things, we can say the land under cultivation is shrinking. That's the one issue. And the second issue is that land holding is becoming smaller and smaller. Why? Because of the division of the land among the family members further, right? So that is why if the land holding is becoming smaller, then this is the obvious need, that is, you can say, to shift the extra burden on the land from agriculture towards the manufacturing sector or somewhere else, because otherwise the per person productivity, per individual, per capita productivity in agriculture would come down. And if the per capita productivity in agriculture comes down, then obviously the people would be excluded from the growth benefits, right? So that is an important thing. And the next thing is a slow growth rate of agriculture. That is also another problem, because in the year 2020-21, the agriculture experienced a growth rate of 3% only, and even uh, in the previous year it remained below that, even 2%, 1.5%, 1.4%, etc., etc. So until and unless the agriculture growth does not pick up, and we are not able to shift those depending on agriculture to some other sector, till then it is not possible to change the fate of those people who are depending on agriculture. So that is why, if we want the inclusion of the uh, rural people to reap the benefits of the growth, right, then this is necessary that we should, you can say, speed up. We should focus on speeding up the agricultural growth, right? And we should focus on shifting the extra burden on agriculture to some other sectors. That's important, right? So next is, you can say, uh, limited social and economic infrastructure. In rural areas, economic and social infrastructure is very poor, right? How? Because the urban sector is contributing the maximum into the output of the country in terms of the GDP, right? As we have discussed that approximately 53.4% is contributed, 54% is contributed by the service sector, 31% is contributed by the that sector, which is the industrial sector. Approximately 84-85% is contributed by those two sectors, which are urban oriented centers. So that is why the focus of the government has been shifting, or has shifted entirely from rural towards the urban, because that is contributing more into the GDP of the country. And the performance and the growth rate in GDP is one of the measures of the performance of the government of a country. So that is why, to show that the GDP is rising further. So the government's focus is shifting on the urban sector, because urban sector is more responsive to the investment, right? So means return is more from the urban sector, right, as compared to the rural sector. So that's why the focus of the government is shifting towards the urban sector. But this is quite injustice, because the 65% of population is living in the rural, and 35% of population is living in the, we can say, urban. And almost the entire focus of the government is on that 35% of population. So then obviously the 65% of population would remain excluded, right? So that is why the government should do the justice here, right? So it should revise its strategies for that purpose, right? So that is an important issue. And the next thing is that law and order problems should be tackled on the priority basis. So whatever the regional issues are there, those needs to be tackled on the priority basis. Like Naga problem is there, Assam problem is there, right? Problem in some other states of Northeast are there, right? And Naxalite problem is there in that red corridor part. And in Jammu and Kashmir, the problems are there, the farmers problem are there, right? So all these problems lead to the law and order order issues, and if the law and order issues pick up, so those turn in bad shape, right? So the destruction takes place in place of the construction. So that leads to affect the economic growth as well. That leads to affect the economic activity. That leads to affect the economic output as well. That affects the employment also, and that affect the new investment also. So that is why these things needs to be tackled by the government, right, with proper attention and with the priority, right? And more and more employment opportunities needs to be developed, needs to be created. So that is also more important, right? So the next important thing is that, right, so there are some basic things, right? Railroad connectivity, education, public health, right? That is the drinking water part of thing, that is the communication. So these needs to be, you can say, fastened up, and everybody should be right included, uh, or everybody should be ensured all these services, right? And one of the biggest problem is that is the financial exclusion of the rural people, though the government has done through the PM Jan Dhan Yojana, right? So government did an effort for the financial inclusion, but still more needs to be done, right? So that is the basic thing, and that is important point over here, right? And the next point is that now I am going to conclude the lecture. So that is the, without inclusive growth, India cannot achieve its demographic dividend. This is very, very much important thing, because India is such a country which is having world's largest young population, right? And if that population is world's largest, so they are growing up, and we need to provide them the opportunities. If they are not provided opportunities, obviously they would be excluded from the growth journey of the country, and instead they would become the liability for the country. They would hinder the growth of the country in other respects as well, right? So that is why, if we want to reap the demographic dividend, right, if we want to get the benefit that India has world's largest population in the working age bracket, right? So then we should focus on these things. We should focus on education. We should focus on skill development. We should focus on public health, right? And we should focus on the generation of more and more employment opportunities in a very honest way, right? So otherwise, it's not possible that we that our growth can become broad based, right? So for the broad based growth, it is required that, right, we should uh, include all that young generation which is in the working age group, right, into the growth journey of the country. And last but not least, we can say that inclusiveness has four pillars. Inclusiveness has four pillars. You can note this point: four pillars, right? One pillar is that of the opportunity. There should be opportunity. Until and unless there is opportunity, there is no hope, there is no expectation that inclusive growth is possible, right? Uh, Obviously, those people who are deprived of opportunities, they will be living on the alms, right? And if they are living on the, we can say, alms, then they would remain excluded, obviously. So opportunity is one important pillar. Second important pillar is capability, right? Capability. So we can say capability means to make the people capable, right? So if we are having the population today, world's largest young population today, and but we are not making them capable to uh, uh, avail the opportunities. So then obviously that's a problem. They would remain excluded, right? And third pillar, that is the access, means accessibility. Accessibility means we can say uh, to bring the opportunities and capability together, right? On one side, there is opportunity. On the other side, there is the capability, right? There is a gap between the two, right? Here is the opportunity line. Here is the capability line, right? And until and unless we don't bring them together, we don't bridge the gap between the two, right? So the opportunities would remain inaccessible to the capable persons, so they would not be able to, uh, right, be included into the growth journey of the country. And the next thing is that is the security. Fourth pillar is security. Security means that is the right. Security means we can say uh, ensuring the livelihood opportunities or the income opportunities or the employment opportunities on sustainable basis, right? So that is we can say, okay, that is means the permanent opportunities, right? So to secure them, to save them, right, from the we can say uh, breaks in their you can say livelihood, right? So that is an important thing, right? So it means so whatever there, so whenever there is a right, so it does not mean that bringing the opportunities for you only for a temporary period, and we can say that employment has been generated, that you people are included. No, it should be on permanent basis. That is the security of source of livelihood, right? So the four pillars, please keep in mind. One pillar of inclusive growth here is opportunity. Second pillar of inclusive growth is that of capability. Then third pillar of inclusive growth, that is accessibility. Accessibility means bringing the capability and opportunity together, right? And the fourth thing is the security of the opportunity, right? So it should be long lasting. So that is also important, right? So the last point is that challenges before inclusive growth in India. So the challenges are one bigger challenge, that is the poverty eradication. Until and unless the poverty is eradicated from the country, inclusive growth cannot be granted. This is the one point. Second thing is the agricultural growth, which is in very poor condition, that needs to be picked up because more than 60% population of the country is living on agriculture. That is why until and unless the growth in that sector is promoted, it is not possible to uh, ensure the economic growth of those people, because there are only two ways to ensure the economic growth of those people who are depending on agriculture: either to shift some of them on the manufacturing or some other sector, or to uh, you can say, or to fasten the to speed up the agricultural growth. There are only two options, right? So next is a good and honest government, and honest schemes should be there. Without that, right? So in our country, this is a challenge, right? First thing is that there is no cooperation between the opposition and the government. That is the biggest thing, right? We are wasting the public money on the parliamentary sittings, parliamentary sessions, but those sessions are going unproductive, right? So let's suppose if the ruling party, right, is not ready to send a bill on the demand of opposition to the select committee of the house, or to the select committee of the two houses, right? Joint committee of the two houses. So then what is the need of holding the parliamentary sessions and spending so much money on that, right? So if the government is in mood that anyhow these bills will be pushed up without paying adequate hearing to the opposition's objections, so then I think the parliamentary proceeding is not required, right? So the government should just draft a bill and send it to the president and let the president sign the bill, right? And then it should be notified, and that's all, right? So as if we take the example of the three agricultural laws, right? I don't. So I am not going into the merit of the agricultural laws, but I am talking about the procedure adopted, right? So procedure followed is that the government brought the bills, right? Opposition demanded that the bills should be sent to the select committee, but instead of sending the bills to the select committee, right, the government just pushed up the bills, right, and uh, those were enacted into law, right, and then what is the need of making the parliament to sit there, right? If there is, if neither there is no purpose of discussion, neither there is any purpose of the select committee, right? And similar is the case, I think, of that which is the uh, bill related with the Delhi's administration, which has been passed recently. In that also the opposition's demand of sending the bill to a select committee for the purpose, that was not accepted by the house, right? And that also went through, right? And what is the purpose of then conducting the sessions, right? So the government should be honest enough, right? Opposition should also cooperate with the government. Government should also give uh, due, you can say, right, hearing to the opposition's objections or demands, right? So let the democracy run like a democracy, right? So that is the important thing. Otherwise, we are wasting the money, and that money can be spent on the betterment of the people, we can say, right? What is the use of spending that money otherwise, right? And similarly, the government schemes, right? The government schemes should not have any hidden agenda of the government, right? Like there are a number of schemes which are having the hidden agenda, which are making the people disabled, right? Or which are, you can say, uh, you which are, you can say, serving the purpose of the corporate, right? In a secret manner. So it means the honesty of the government is must. And moreover, many of the schemes are made on paper, and those are not implemented at the ground level. So that lacks the willpower, commitment from the government's end, and that also needs to be, right, taken care of. And the child labor should be ended, right? And the orthodox mindset should be discarded totally, because that is the mindset which hinders the women from participating, right? So that is there. Women empowerment is another important thing, and eradication of regional disparities, that is another challenge. So we are having a number of challenges. Number one is the poverty reduction, one challenge. Second is the agricultural growth, second challenge. Third is the honesty of the government. That is the third challenge in our country, right? So uh, this is before you. Everybody is seeing what is there, right? Since the last many years, it is not only the BJP government. Since the last many years, the things are happening that way. So that is why that is very much important. Next is child labor. How to mm, you can say eliminate the child labor from the country. That is a social evil that is required. That is a challenge before us. Orthodox mindset, right? How to set it right. That is also another challenge. Women empowerment is another challenge. And eradication of regional disparities is also another challenge, right? So government has taken a number of initiatives. Some initiatives include like Bharat Nirman project, under which the rural infrastructure is going to be developed. Second is Manrega, that is the second important step which has been taken by the government for this. And third is the Ayushman Bharat scheme, right, which is there, right? Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Suraksha Bima Yojana, that is there, which has been introduced there, right? And next is the shift in education policy, right? Government has tried from its end, but let us see what results the education policy will bring. Next is the crop insurance, which is introduced. Next is the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, which is introduced to promote education, right? And similarly, that is the midday meal scheme, etc., right? So many schemes have been introduced in this for the from the health end, right? In the health sector also. Like in few days earlier, we discussed about the Poshan scheme, Poshan 2.0, right? And that was also discussed. And similarly, integrated child development scheme is also there. And next is the national health mission, which has been brought by the government. So these are some of the steps, right, which have been introduced by the government to ensure the inclusive development, right, to ensure the inclusive development. Yes, ICDS, that is the integrated child development scheme. Okay, ICDS. Okay, so from my end, this chapter is over, right? So I will give you some assignment on this chapter later on, not now. So I would expect that you should prepare that assignment, right? So anything, any doubt, lecture में बोर तो नहीं हुए आप? Lecture